Hi Scentsy fans, it's Wickless Karen here. I am talking to you about a non-Scentsy video today. This is more of a blog thing because it's been going around since January. I don't know the guy's name, but he has coined a term, Xennial. I don't know if you've heard this, but what is a Xennial? A Xennial is a micro generation that was born sort of the first Star Wars trilogy, so between 1977 and 1983. And a Xennial is someone who is not a Gen Xer because they're a little bit young for that, and they're not a Millennial because they don't identify with the Millennials and their captivity with social media selfies. They're just not, they don't get that either. So they were kind of too late for Gen X and too early for Millennials, so they've created this micro generation. And I think it's really interesting, and I just wanted to tell you some of my thoughts that I've been having since thinking about this, because every now and then it occurs to me, and I actually made notes on my phone, just because I was like, this is interesting. There's a lot of things that typify people born in these years that no one else is really going to have those similar experiences. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to say, every time you talk about generational characteristics, you're generalizing, okay? So please don't leave the comments, how can you say that? How can you generalize about an entire blah, blah, blah? You can't, okay? We are all individuals, but there are trends that develop across these generational things. You know, baby boomers are typified by certain things, and you know, I can talk to a baby boomer and they'll say, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me because blah, blah, blah. Fine. Of course it doesn't. You're an individual person with your own wants, needs, experiences. But there are trends that develop, and I think they're really interesting. And so I want to talk about I want to expand the definition of Xennial, all right? And first thing is, Xennials are children generally, okay? So please, you know, using quotation marks, this is a generalization. Generally, Xennials are the children of late baby boomers. So people who did not feel that they were completely part of the baby boomer movement. Perhaps they were a little bit late. So, for instance, my parents, who did get married young and have children very, very young, my dad complains all the time that he missed the boat. He missed out on a lot of things. And I think he means sort of economically, he didn't fall into the baby boomer category that sort of worked hard, got everything they needed. He later in life had to learn how to leave a company he'd been with for years, switch jobs, learn how to be economically stretchy. What's that word? Oh my God. Whatever that word is for stretch. Oh my God, I don't know. But he had to learn how to do that as a 50-year-old man. And I think a lot of baby boomers retired from the company that they started working for. That's something that sort of typifies them, is they went to work at a company, you found a good job, and that company took care of you, whether you worked for Ford or whether you worked for the electric company or whatever. You sort of stayed with that company and they took care of you forever. Now, millennials are almost the entire different side of the spectrum, because millennials aren't even going into traditional employment at the rates that their previous generations have been. These are people who are creating their own businesses around things that me, as a, you know, the first side of the millennial, last side of the thing, as a Xennial, I don't understand how they're making money from it. Like, I see people, I have a friend who is 25 years old. She's a lovely person. She's very smart. She's very intelligent. She's very insightful. She posts on Instagram several times a day. She posts what she's eating. She posts her workouts. She posts what she's wearing, you know, outfit of the day, OOTD. And I asked her, why? Well, I think that is a major separation, is we don't understand the millennial reasoning. We don't know how there is money or a living in social media. Now, obviously, generalization, blah, 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 blah. Don't crack on me for that. But I don't understand why she would spend so much time and effort working on developing a following on Instagram to see what she's wearing, what she works out, what she eats. I don't understand what that gains for her, because for me, being on social media is about promoting Scentsy. And yes, I do things for my family back home so they can see my kids, and you know, if there's something really funny that I think people will appreciate, I'll post it. But I don't think I build my following on, I mean, even this video, I'm like, this is totally out of the norm of what I do, because mostly I do Scentsy. But I try to do some vlog style things just so people get to know kind of me as a person. But I guess what it is I don't understand how millennials can sell themselves and their personality and their uniqueness as a product. How do you do it, millennials? Anyway, so if we're talking about the micro generation born between 1977 and 1983, I am smacking that. And both of my younger brothers are smacking that as well. So we are all Xennials. We are all that micro generation. We all grew up with Star Wars always having existed. Okay? So I think that's something in our subconscious anyways. You got to think these things always existed. We never saw a world without that. My son was born a few days after Michael Jackson died, and I always think, gosh, he's grown up in a world where Michael Jackson has always been a dead person. And that blows my mind a little bit. So here are my things that I think typify a Xennial and set us apart from both the Gen Xers and from the Millennials. And the first thing is that we know how to do stuff. We know how to do stuff that nobody else knows how to do. Well, sort of. We rented our first apartments by looking in the newspaper and going around and driving around. We bought our first cars by finding someone whose friend worked at some car lot and finding out about that. We read about the cars. There was no online, online was new. We didn't use it for renting apartments and buying cars and setting up our electricity. So if the internet crashed tomorrow, I think the millennials would have a hard time remembering how to do things. And that includes like reading maps and things like that. Whereas as a Xennial, I'm the very last person who grew up having to learn map reading skills. And it was a thing that we learned in school. And, how do you rent an apartment? How do you analog live your life as a grown-up? And I think if the big Armageddon thing happened tomorrow, I think Xennials would know how to do some stuff that millennials might not know how to do. Now, millennials would figure it out in a different way, but, explaining to someone how you rent an apartment is you go drive around that neighborhood and you look for sale signs, and then you call the number, and then you go around. That sounds like madness because they want to just look it up. So we know how to do things, and that's very constructive things. We know how to fix things. Okay, we know how to record a tape. We know how to. I need to take that out. I don't know. I'm going to think on that a little bit more. But this has all been mulling over. So the second thing I kind of thought about that sets Xennials apart from Gen Xers and Millennials is that we met our partners in real life for the most part, but those of us who've had secondary relationships have dated online. So we have lived in a world where online dating, it might have been around when we were in our early 20s and that, but it was very sketchy, and it wasn't really acceptable to say, I met this person on whatever that matchmaking site was in the beginning. So most of us have met our partners sort of through introductions, through friends, or through work or whatever. But if we have later relationships, then we are using online dating. So we have sort of lived two different lives in that way. We've had to learn how to meet people online and in real life. And I think that that sort of also goes to relationships in general, because millennials know how they can consider people that they've met online as they can consider them actual friends. And I think that Xennials, we meet friends online and we hold them very dear, but until we meet you in person, we've still got to have that person-to-person context. We really do. I think and that's the Gen Xers would not do online dating, and they're too cynical for that kind of thing. And I think they were the ones that sort of scared us off. You don't buy a car online. You don't meet your partner online. You don't buy a pair of shoes online. What if they don't fit? So the Gen Xers had that cynicism and the millennials had the great optimism. And we're kind of stuck in between saying, well, we've done it both ways and we can see value in both ways. So I think as far as relationships go, we need that. We need a person-to-person kind of contact to completely feel comfortable with someone. We don't feel that we completely know them until we've met them in real life. And I think there's a lot more to explore in there. Everything I'm saying, there's so much more to explore, but this video would be like 6 hours long to talk about what are all the differences. So I'm trying to give you some things to think about. One thing I wanted to bring up, because we can talk about televisions, we can talk about phones, we can talk about cars, we can talk about all kinds of tech. But what about cigarettes? Let's talk about cigarettes. Gen Xers smoked. They smoked a lot, and smoking was cool. Reality bites, and they were, people smoked. People don't smoke anymore, and millennials don't smoke. They vape. And I think that Xennials are people who have used vaping as a way to quit smoking. And obviously other generations do, again, generalizing. Duh, don't scream at me. But Xennials are kind of the first people who said, you know what, I will try this vaping because I have some of that millennial optimism and some of that millennial hope, and I think I can stop smoking. Besides the fact that we weren't smoking nearly as much as the Gen Xers before us were smoking, and even the baby boomers anyway. So that's something, is that we look for electronic versions of stuff. Even Sensi is a Xennial product for sure. I mean, the owners are sort of tail end of Gen X. I think they probably might identify as Xennial, and they were looking for, instead of lighting that candle, it's this, what's the electronic version? Can we make this better? And I think the Xennials do sort of embrace the new technology, and they're the first ones to sort of make the switch because we're used to switching. And I think if anything, the whole point of this micro generation is that we are used to change and we are malleable. We know how to go from a completely different analog to digital in all sorts of ways, not just in the ways that you're thinking. So that's something to think about. And the biggest thing, I think, sort of culturally, we want to look at, Xennials grew up thinking that their life was going to be a John Hughes film. When I was about 18, I read a quote and it said, I thought my life was going to be like a John Hughes film, and it wasn't. I feel duped. And I identified with that so much because we grew up watching 16 Candles and Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and we weren't teenagers. We were children when we watched those films. Actual teenagers weren't watching those films. They were doing teenager things. And we watched them thinking this is what teenage life is going to be like. This is what being an adult is going to be like. This is how high school drama works. And then we got there and it wasn't quite so fun, and it was totally different, or people didn't really care about, who was the cheerleader and who was the Blaine and it didn't happen for us that way. Nobody stood outside of our windows with a boombox, like, and say anything. That didn't happen for us. So I think our cynicism, I think the Xennials are full of hope, and I think our hope comes from John Hughes films. I've said it. I think that we had a lot of hopeful hearts from John Hughes films, and that it was kind of dashed by reality and the Gen Xers. So we do have that Gen X cynicism, but it's almost like we romanticize their cynicism, because if you think of, like, Reality Bites was sort of a typical Gen X film. Their media was very cynical, and we romanticized that. We looked forward to it. We couldn't wait to be jaded and hard. And then when we got there, we kind of weren't, because, oh my God, look what we have now. If you think about, and that sort of sums up, we still maintain the cynicism, but we have the optimism and drive of the millennials. I think the TV show that best typifies sort of our generation and what we lived through is My So-Called Life, which is a very short-lived TV show. It was very not popular at the time. It's reached cult status now. And I must say, I watched it with vigor. I would wake up on Thursday morning and say, it's My So-Called Life night. And I'll tell you what I wasn't watching is Friends. I wasn't watching Friends because I was watching My So-Called Life, which ran against Friends. And millennials are watching Friends reruns. They're not watching My So-Called Life reruns. And My So-Called Life, it really had that cynicism. But she never lost hope that she was going to get her Jordan Catalano. It never wavered. She still, it really typifies it. Anyway, go watch that series because it's brilliant anyway. But, yeah, I think there's so much I could talk about, the computer systems that we grew up with and the telephones. But basically, we went from things being household to things being handheld. Your television being household, your TV being household. Any kind of, your friends had to call you on the landline, and they had to speak to your dad, possibly, just before they spoke to you. And now everything is handheld. Everything has been made individual. And we like it, and we embrace it. But we remember that it wasn't always so. And I think that kind of sets us apart. Anyway, tell me some things that you think set apart millennials and Gen Xers from this Xennial, and how you would say the damn word. tell me what you think. I would really like to hear your most typical kind of TV show or musician or whatever. What do you think typifies this generation? Let me know. Let's talk about it. And you see, I'm representing. We grew up with Atari, we grew up with Nintendo, and now we have these individual. I don't even play games, but whatever. It's changed a lot. Let me know down below what you think. All right, guys, have a great day. Bye.